We acknowledge that we are speaking from the unceded and sovereign lands of First Nations people in Australia. We also acknowledge West Papuan sovereignty. In 2013, Kaparia Leniata was publicly stripped naked, tortured, doused in petrol and burnt alive. Accused of witchcraft, Leniata's story is where our journey begins and research starts. Her violent death made world headlines, but is not an isolated incident in New Guinea and West Papua. Kaparia's story represents one story of the 70% of women throughout the region who are raped or physically assaulted in their lifetime. The severity and pervasiveness of gender-based violence has been described a pandemic, like a war zone. However, this particular narrative is often deficit-based and problematizes non-Westernized cultures. It is our contention then that the nature of violence in this region forms part of a deeper structure of modern slavery. Therefore, our definition of modern slavery has been this: the complex nexus between the brutality of colonization and exploitation, which works to produce a set of social conditions that systematically perpetuate the bondage of women. This is illustrated in the statistics that are known about violence in the region, where nearly more than 1,000 witch hunts take place each year. However, this is the tip of the iceberg. From this, we understood the need to unpack this deeper, and to do so, we used Indigenous knowledge as theory. This is a theory which draws upon ideas that knowledge is not neutral, but instead subjective and based on unequal structures of power.
In keeping with our decolonising methodology, we use systems mapping to understand the institutional structures and cultural norms that impact women in Papua New Guinea. We did this to understand the complexity of the system and the interests that hold it in place. We shaped our systems map around the key mental models we identified in our iceberg map. Our systems map is built around the deep structure from the iceberg map to illustrate cycles of violence and exploitation faced by women. To understand the critical points in this challenge landscape, we centred our analysis on the ways in which modernisation has distorted and disconnected Papua New Guinea from traditional values. Firstly, we looked at how customs were monetised and how women became exchangeable commodities for use in the money economy. One of the consequences of this is a decrease in the inherent value of women and a devaluing of women's education. Lower education rates lead to a lack of formal employment opportunities for women and cause women to rely on informal marketplace incomes. These marketplace incomes are vulnerable to seasonal fluctuations, which further compound the vulnerability of women's livelihoods. Finally, this distortion of traditional ways of life results in culturally specific forms of violence, including sorcery and witch hunts, like in Kapari Leniata's story.
Of the many gaps and levers we identified, the disconnection between policies and local cultures stood out as a key hindrance in the solutions landscape. The New Guinea region is by far the most culturally dense region in the world, with 817 different languages and 312 different tribes. Therefore, prescriptive and often blanket solutions typically overlook the social and cultural nuances that feed into the varying occurrences of female exploitation in the region, and deep social structures such as the Wontok system typically hold more authority than formal legislation. An effective lever of change will involve conducting a deep mapping exercise of social norms between cultures and designing programs accordingly with the local people. Another pivotal gap was identified through the observing of dynamics of stakeholders in the solutions landscape and how the lack of synergies was diminishing efforts. On one hand, large organisations lack social capital and understanding to deliver meaningful programs, while the grassroots organisations lack longevity and sustainability. This highlighted the potential lever of change that could be achieved through mapping the system of power dynamics and impact in the total stakeholder ecosystem. To help us further understand the nature of these power dynamics, we created the stakeholder map that privileged Papua New Guinea women, placing them at the centre of the analysis. The resulting map displayed a clear trend where systemic power flows away from the women in the centre of the structure towards governing bodies on the outside. Through the mapping exercises, we were able to see that the violence and exploitation of women in Papua New Guinea is the driving force of a central system and helps to maintain the systems of commercial, societal, cultural, and political slavery of women in the region. To assert these notions, we strive to engage and champion the voices of PNG people closest to the issue. In the process, we were privileged to engage with some truly powerful and awe-inspiring women fighting for justice for all women in PNG. People like Cressida Koala, currently in exile in PNG, due to her 10-year ongoing battle to realise justice for the nearly 200 women in her village of Pagera that were raped or tortured under the watch of one of the largest mining corporations in the world. Or Sister Daisy Lysiana, who independently started women-led support groups in her village for the women too scared to report abuse to local authorities. It is therefore our hope to gain much more than a learning experience, but to deliver a systems analysis and tool that might be used by the Papua New Guinea community to help articulate self-determined and sovereign solutions towards their continued fight for freedom and justice.